I'm the one who's been harassing many of you with many emails the past several weeks. I appreciate you all showing up today. I'm really excited for tonight. Just a couple things to note. If you're a judge or debater and you parked at the South Garage, first of all, sorry for how far that is, and let me know sometime after this, and I can get you a parking pass. If you need a notepad or paper, or a notepad or pens, we have extra ones of those. And we're gonna get started here pretty soon. So first I'm gonna introduce our debaters. On the government side, we have Camilla Broderick from the Rikers Debate Project. We're gonna hold the applause at the end of this, okay? We're on a schedule here. Michael Montague, who is a senior scholar at the Center for Health Security at Johns Hopkins. And then Nathaniel Yoon from Johns Hopkins undergraduate debate team, who's the captain of, yes? Okay, there we go. On the opposition side, we have Dominic Crispino from the Rikers Debate Project, and then Varachi Gunanathan from the Johns Hopkins undergraduate debate team, and then Alexander Linder from the Georgetown Center for Health Science and Security. Thank you for driving all the way up here. And then our distinguished judges. I'm going to pull out my phone because many of you have more letters after your name than are in my entire name, so it's a little hard to remember. I'm going to just go random here. Dr. Anita Gupta is professor of medicine at Johns Hopkins, chief of the Division of Infectious Disease. And then David Thomas is also professor of medicine at Johns Hopkins. We have several of those here. Dr. Stuart Ray, professor of medicine at at Johns Hopkins. Kausar Talat, associate professor at Johns Hopkins. Who else here? I was going to make you all sit in a row. Okay. Yes, and Steven Salzberg, professor of computational. There's a lot. There we go. I should probably be reading off this thing, shouldn't I?
And packages in the back.
Yes, professor of biomedical engineering, computer science, and biostatistics at Johns Hopkins University. Then Gigi Gronball, who has been very gracious in helping us organize this event, is a senior scholar at Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security and an associate professor in the Department of Environmental Health and Engineering at Johns Hopkins. Aaron Sorrell is likewise a senior scholar at the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security and an associate professor at Hopkins. And then, looking through, Catherine Srama is the director of, off the top of my head, drug pricing at Arnold Ventures, which is a philanthropic firm. Josh Wenzel is the director of pandemic preparedness, or associate director of pandemic preparedness policy at the Scowcroft Institute at Texas A&M University. Did I get that right? There we go, good for me. And then Dr. Kausar Talat, yes, is, I think we've covered that all, sorry. And then, Sherry Bond is I'm really excited about Sherry. I emailed you out of nowhere. Sherry is formerly the biosecurity officer and biosafety officer for the University of Maryland, is now the associate director for environmental health and safety at University of Maryland in Baltimore. So she has hand-on experience here. And then Professor Andrew Pekosh, who is is another professor here at Johns Hopkins. And I think that about covers it. Very esteemed, and Professor Rob Sprinkle, who is the associate professor of public policy at the University of Maryland, College Park, with a particular focus in life sciences and public policy. So I think that's got everybody. Again, sorry about the mishap with my notes here. And I'll introduce myself real quick. So I'm Jake. I work for One Day Sooner. We are a public health nonprofit that originally started as a grassroots movement for people who wanted to sign up for COVID challenge trials. Obviously, that was a little bit of a controversial proposition. And so from that, we learned the importance of being able to have dialogue with people who are on the other side of an issue with us. We don't have a particular stake in the gain of function issue, but we are broadly very interested in topics of public concern when it comes to biosecurity, pandemic preparedness, and public health. The Rikers Debate Project is a nonprofit founded in 2016 that teaches communications and debate skills to people who have been incarcerated or formerly incarcerated, people who are incarcerated or formerly incarcerated. And the general goal of Rikers Debate Project is to equip people who have been incarcerated with the skills to advocate for themselves on issues that affect themselves and broader society. And we also have, again, very thankful for the Johns Hopkins undergraduate debate team. They've been real champions, putting up with a lot of emails and logistical flurry of nonsense for the past couple of weeks, and they were great in helping us secure this space and as serving as our debaters. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started. As my cell phone can attest, you should probably silence your cell phones. Once again, if you need any paper or pens, let me know, and we should be good to start here with Dominic. Or, nope, never mind.
No.
Camilla. It's been a long week, you know.
What?
Do you want to keep time for yourself up there too, or I will?
Yeah, sure.
I will signal when you have a minute left.
That's fine for me, but I guess I should. Okay. All right. Are you ready? Are we ready? 1, 2, 3. The government stands today to propose eliminating federal funding for gain-of-function research. Gain-of-function research involves deliberately altering a pathogen to make it substantially more dangerous, for example, by increasing lethality or transmissibility. We define the term gain-of-function based on the context in which the term was coined, so namely the controversy surrounding the modification of avian influenza strain H5N1. So in other words, something like modifying algae to make it glow is not what the government is concerned with here today. Ultimately, the risks associated with gain-of-function research vastly outweigh any potential benefits that may come from funding it for three main reasons. First, the risk of accidental release of products of gain-of-function research is far too high. Risk is a function of probability times impact, and in the case of gain-of-function research, the impact of an accidental leak could be catastrophic in a world that is increasingly interconnected. Deaths of thousands or even millions. The chance of a leak is far from minuscule, too. Even with safety regulations in place, accidents can and do happen. In 2014, a CDC lab was the site of an accidental anthrax exposure incident, which affected 75 employees. That same year, the FDA found smallpox vials in a government storage closet. It's not a question of if an accident will occur, but when and how bad an accident will be. Second, gain-of-function research represents a biosecurity and bioterror threat by providing potential blueprints for the weaponization of pathogens. To this day, you can access details of the experiment adapting H7N1 virus from ostriches in 2014. That virus developed a 70% fatality rate in ferrets comparable to Ebola. That virus, even if gain-of-function research is well regulated, we cannot control how that research is later used. This threat comes from rogue actors like terrorists or even other states. The US NIH is one of the largest founders of basic research in the world, and cutting off funding for gain-of-function research would mean decreasing the risk, even if it's not eliminated entirely. Third, a significant body of gain-of-function research can be replaced by alternative experimental methods, providing most or all of the benefit with none of the serious risk. For example, the pandemic spurred advances in pseudovirus research, where things like the coronavirus spike protein are grafted onto otherwise harmless microorganisms. The grave consequences of potential lab leaks or bioweapons attacks means that the burden is on the opposition to show that there are substantial public health and security benefits that can only be achieved through gain-of-function research. Thus, we believe the risks associated with gain-of-function research today are too great to justify continued funding by the government. Thank you. Early.
Next year, Dominic.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the government, distinguished opposition and audience. My name is Dominic Crispino. I rise in opposition to the proposed ban of federal funds for gain-of-function research. My first point is that a ban on gain-of-function is simply too broad and would have a chilling effect on research. In the government's telling, a ban would simply make all potentially dangerous research and nothing more disappear. But we must take that definition of gain-of-function at face value. It is any research where organisms are modified to gain some sort of new function. A ban would be overly broad, a ban of federal funding. It can have a chilling effect on a huge range of scientific activity, even if the ban just targeted research resulting in increased virulence or transmissibility of a pathogen. Since we can never be certain what exactly might result from scientific experiments, the fear of being labeled a gain-of-function researcher and losing funding could thus hinder important research involving genetic manipulation of microorganisms. Which leads to our second point. A ban on federal funding for gain-of-function research would jeopardize low-risk research as well. Consider adenoviruses, which are commonly modified for use in vaccines or gene therapy. If we modify them to make them more infectious and thus able to deliver gene therapies, for example, that would still be banned under the government's ideal world. This example demonstrates the slippery slope involved in this federal ban. The third point, even if gain-of-function research results in more dangerous pathogens, this does not mean that all gain-of-function research is wise and should be done. There should be plenty of regulatory oversight, but imagine a case where a new coronavirus variant arises in a distant part of the world, and initial analysis by local scientists suggests it is very concerning. To determine if the new variant will escape our current vaccines, should a researcher in the United States take time to try arrange to ship samples across the world, potentially spreading it even more, or simply modify existing coronaviruses in a secure lab? The answer is clear. In the context of a potentially dangerous pandemic, gain-of-function research is an indispensable way to quickly prioritize the fight against a rapidly evolving deadly pathogen. Why would we tie one hand behind our back in our quest to stay safe from viruses and pandemics? It should be all hands on deck when we exploit every single item in our scientific menu, and that includes gain-of-function research. Surely public confidence in our system requires we use every avenue available. I want to address a couple of points the government made. This notion of lab leaks, the potential costs of gain of function are overstated, given proper precautions, protocols, and regulations. The problems described with lab errors and related biosecurity issues are neither unique to nor excessively related to gain of function research. Indeed, all the examples cited are government labs. With proper protocols in place and proper precautions imbued in the process through regulations, such risks are exceedingly minimized. Such regulations do not require a ban on federal funding. Between proper vetting of the application process, peer review and oversight, and regulation by the agency, there is no reason to believe that all reasonable biosecurity concerns are met. Keeping in mind that in life there is no such thing as zero risk. It is just as speculative to say there might not be an unintended consequence for a loss of function research. How do we know? It is speculation. The government raises the bad actors or dual use problem, the Vladimir Putins and Kim Jong-uns of the world, and bioterrorism. They should not be a consideration. The evil intent of evil persons should never be a consideration in our scientific progress and our ability to be safe. Evil actors have the capabilities of developing the same information and processes themselves if they so choose. A ban on federal funding would not change this. Therefore, when we measure the clear benefits of gain-of-function research against the minimal risks of lab safety, banning gain-of-function studies is clearly irrational. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. I would like to extend a few of the points that Camilla made and also explain to you why many of the positions that we begin to hear from the opposition don't make as much sense as they sound. To begin with, the core of the case of the government is in the definition. We are not concerned with anything that might be described as gain of function, and you shouldn't lose that as a straw, or accept that as a straw man for questions of chilling effect. The truth is that research and research funders are specialists. They understand technical terms and they understand technical distinctions. And they will be able to say, this is obviously what this law talks about, and this is not. Okay? Perhaps the public could not make that discrimination, but we are not creating this policy for the public. Next, with regards to and I feel that that completely answers the question of slippery slopes and chilling effects. Next, I would like to talk about how the supposed potential for accidents is overstated. In 1971, a Soviet bioweapons lab led to an accidental leak of smallpox. That happened again in a British lab in 1978. In 1979, there was an accidental release of anthrax that led to, 66 confirmed fatalities and probably more. In 1995, millions of rabbits were killed as a result of an accidental release from an attempt to figure out how to control rabbit populations on an island. It made it all the way to the Australian mainland. And in 2015, there were 192 labs that were accidentally sent live anthrax spores by the Dugway Proving Grounds. Combined with the example that my colleague mentioned, that is no fewer than 6 accidental lab releases in the last 50 years, on average once every 8 years. That's more frequent than naturally occurring pandemics. I submit to you that the bulk of the risk is, in fact, actually in laboratory work and predominantly in actual gain-of-function work, not specific work to biology as a whole. And the reason, of course, is because of the other side of the risk equation. Risk equals probability times impact. The danger of a known agent is relatively reduced. And so normal research on normal agents that are known is naturally constrained. Whereas a new agent, something novel, something that came out of our imaginations, or something that we have put together without even thinking about, perhaps, that's unknown. And that means there are no therapies in place, there are no vaccines, there are no epidemiological models. And that's what makes it dangerous. That's why it's different. Okay, with regards to, I'd just like to also say, with regards to the question of zero risk, of course, nothing is zero risk. But I think I've shown you the numbers suggest that this is actually much more probable and much more dangerous. It's greater risk. With regards to, we can't predict what will happen. That's the point. Every time we make a mutation, every time we make a change, we don't know what's going to happen. By making that point, he's actually making our point that gain of function is dangerous.
No, I got it. Sorry. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you this afternoon. I wanted to talk about a few points that was discussed by the pro-government side. Gain-of-function research plays a vital role in scientific inquiry and allows for greater understanding of both the genotypic and phenotypic variants of certain viral pathogens to aid in vaccine development, as well as other medical countermeasures for important research gains. Gain-of-function research outcomes cannot necessarily be replicated by other types of research. For instance, there was discussion by the opposition of loss-of-function research. In several cases of loss-of-function research performed on influenza, the same types of phenotypes that were discussed by gain-of-function were not be able to be replicated in loss-of-function research. There was also discussion of the concern about definitions in dangerous. The definition of dangerous is particularly in the case of the government, solely decided by the government. From what we can tell, this definition of what is dangerous in dangerous research was not discussed with other researchers, but is solely on the arguments of the government's approach to gain-of-function research, which begs a lot of questions of what type of research could be considered dangerous. When discussing accidental lab leaks, while lab leaks do occur, none of the discussions brought up by the pro-ban side actually relate to gain-of-function research. Indeed, smallpox and anthrax come from government labs, so it is not necessarily in the cases that were discussed an issue of the type of research being done, but inappropriate institutional and governmental methods, which are and can be adapted to new findings. For instance, when we halted gain-of-function research on influenza in 2014, it was restarted in 2017 after a robust discussion was held among academic and research scientists on proper proposals in place for the type of research and how to continue its safety. While this ban did occur, it also led to more robust institutional changes for safer research for all involved. When discussing a new agent, it is true that perhaps a new agent could be discovered and we don't know what a mutation will do. However, gain-of-function research allows us to understand the mechanisms of certain human and pathogen interactions, which allows us to prepare for and develop countermeasures for these efforts. Secondly, lab leaks are not unique to gain-of-function, and thus banning federal funds for these efforts would necessarily halt lab leaks in general. What stops lab leaks is greater institutional knowledge and practices in biosafety and biosecurity. Halting gain-of-function the support of gain-of-function by government funding, will also not stop gain-of-function research. Particularly, it will force this research into other areas of excellence, perhaps Europe, Asia, Latin America, Africa. The research does not stop, it just stops here, thus not really halting the risk associated with gain-of-function research. And stopping these types of research also may impact the ability of the United States to be the penultimate scientific body in the world. Lastly, because I believe I am close to time, there was a discussion that therapies are not in place. Therapies, of course, are not in place at this time. Thank you. Take care.
Gain-of-function research is essential research for furthering our understanding and protecting ourselves against these exact dangerous pathogens. We've talked about the definition of gain-of-function research, and both sides have agreed that we don't know what the result of research is. We don't know what will happen when you give a pathogen some sort of function. What this means is that it's more likely that low-level risk research is seen as having a higher risk because we don't know there might be a possibility for it being considered gain-of-function research, and so there will be indeed a chilling effect on research. There is risk inherent in everything, and stopping everything that might lead to some sort of this risk is not like a good way to deal with this, rather than enforcing regulations. So this means that a lot of research that doesn't actually result in anything dangerous might be under risk of being considered dangerous. About leaks, we've talked about how proper regulations would be the right way to stop this kind of things from happening. Leaks aren't unique to gain-of-function research. It's something that is inherent to research everywhere. We do research anyway because of the benefit it brings, and the solution to stopping leaks is higher regulation instead of stopping research completely and we don't get any benefit from it at all. This risk of leaks is not especially high for gain-of-function research, so it doesn't justify banning gain-of-function research just because there is a risk. About bioterror, we have already established on both sides that banning federal funding will not cause an end of gain-of-function research. There are still foreign countries, there are still private companies. This just means funding is not provided. It doesn't mean the research doesn't happen. What this means is that the risk is still very much there for all of us, except now if we have decrease the amount of research that's going on about it, we understand it less. So in the event of an actual leak, or in the event of future threats, which is very likely considering the research is still going on and there are still like things like diseases that will come up that we will have to deal with in the future. In that case, we don't have the resources and the knowledge to be prepared for dealing with this and to be able to combat it. The alternatives are shipping dangerous things all over the world if we don't have gain-of-function research to research this kind of pathogens, and we have also proven that that is even more dangerous. There is a risk in everything, and the solution is regulation, not stopping all research. Both sides have conceded that there will still be gain-of-function research happening, and there will still be a risk in the world that will threaten everyone in this world, not just the foreign countries. And if we were to stop our research, that would mean that we are not prepared for the potential consequences of anything bad that might happen. Gain-of-function research will happen anyway. Do we want this to be under a reliable organization with set regulations that has the public's best interest as their goal, or do we want this to happen exclusively under foreign governments and companies who survive on a profit? Thank you.
There's been a lot of statements about the very low risk that apparently our side has, that we have a very small chance of our catastrophic effects happening. And yet, I think the opposition to this has never really proven how significant the risks are that they are fighting against. That they think that when they develop gain-of-function research and they put all these different mutations together, as I think Michael demonstrates in the previous speech, we don't know how any of these mutations will interact with any number of other mutations, or if we're going to ever reach a particular endpoint of some kind of organism that could then be dangerous, that could then be a pathogen, and particularly would have been a pathogen that arose naturally if we had not started interfering. So what they had to prove was not just, we can research things and we can find deadly diseases and so on, but if we had not done that research, that deadly disease would have arisen in the wild, would have come up naturally, and then we would have to have countermeasures to deal with it. Because if they could not prove that, then the only source of that particular pathogen, the only place that could ever come from, is from our gain-of-function research. It never would have had developed otherwise. We never would have needed countermeasures because that specific set of random mutations never could have arisen unless we had researched it in that particular way. So I don't think that they've even proven the premise of their case, that not just gain-of-function research is not extremely dangerous, because we do a lot of things that are not extremely dangerous all the time, but that then it is worth the money to spend on this, that it is a good idea to research these extremely low risks, not only that there will be a pathogen that is dangerous, but in all our research, in all of our mutations, we will happen upon the very precise and specific combination of mutations that is the exact same kind of set of mutations that would have happened otherwise. The result of this is they have merely proven that they can stop one specific kind of threat. We can develop countermeasures against one specific way that these can mutate, but not against the mutations that are likely to arise without our individual interference. What are those mutations? I think that we've pointed out that they are the ones that already exist, the pathogens that have already gained functions. We don't need to develop a specific way to figure out what could become dangerous in the future. There are many dangers that we know about right now and can specifically counteract in the ways that we know that they affect people. So they were the ones that actually had a very low risk of them having an effect. They were the ones who never proved that the pathogens that they target with their research are in fact dangerous because, again, they might prove that they are very high magnitude, that there is a very large impact if they did arise in the wild, but they never proved that those ones have a high probability or even any probability of arising without us causing them. And what are the harms that come when we do this research that we find some kind of pathogen, and given all probabilities and all these ways that these interact, the only chance of this pathogen ever emerging was inside of a government lab? That is when we have the catastrophic leaks or the damage that could happen that I think we pointed out happens more frequently than it really happens inside of these natural emergencies of pandemics. And also, these are only the ones we know about, in fact. So I think that a lot of the claims that they've made really had to prove not just that these are dangerous, so we can find dangerous things, because I think we've shown there are harms to creating dangerous things, but that it's worth it to develop countermeasures against a hypothetical way that a very specific kind of bogeyman would emerge instead of fighting the ones that we know exist today. The final explanation that I think that they had to prove was that doing that kind of gain-of-function research, making extremely dangerous microorganisms, was the only way to figure out the way that these that they could develop. We pointed out that gain-of-function research, the way that we ban it, is not done in a generalized sense, but as Camilla points out, in the specific way of banning these highly dangerous ones that don't just give any kind of function, they give the function that lets them kill humans more effectively, or allows them to develop ones that can specifically target, infect, and cause huge amounts of damage. Now, we are fine developing some functions as long as we do it inside of say, pseudoviruses, as Camilla points out. And as Michael points out, we don't really have to worry about specialists misinterpreting this and thinking, oh no, this might apply to me even though I'm not doing gain-of-function research. We know that they will specifically understand which ones this applies to and not worry about it so long as they're not creating those dangerous kinds of viruses. So this debate was really not just about, is there a high risk of damage happening? It is, do they stop something that is real, a tangible threat that we can research in, or do they fight against something that might exist, but 99% of the time never comes to fruition? Thus, we propose.
All right, thank you to both sides. I also forgot to disclaim, if this is not obvious, they did not choose their sides. As the dictator of the debate, I told them which ones they're on, so this is not incriminating evidence for anyone. This is not necessarily representative of their actual viewpoints, which goes as well for the judges. So you guys are going to be dismissed in a minute to discuss among yourselves how you thought the debate went, and I believe Josh will be leading you out and helping with that. You look like you just had a tray. Okay, yeah, so Josh and I will be helping you with that, and then we'll come back in about 15 to 20 minutes, and we'll have each of you guys deliver a short kind of deliberation on why you voted the way you did. But yeah, and in the meantime, for the audience, I'll be passing out index cards where you can write the secret ballot, and that will count as one vote as well, because it's kind of an oligarchy. But yeah, thank you guys very much. So judges, if you could congregate around Josh and the beautiful purple shirt there, and we will give the debaters some much needed rest. All right, thank you everybody. So we've had the judges deliberate, only minimal fist fighting, and we're going to start here. We're going to have the judges, and again, for the disclaimer purposes, what is said in the next 5, 10, 15 minutes is not the true heartfelt beliefs of the judges necessarily, but how they judge the round. We'll also have the audience vote component here. I'm just going to kind of start from the left. We'll have the judges give a short little explanation of why they voted the way they did, what they maybe liked or didn't like about the round, and what they wish had been argued differently. And we will keep the tally and then go from there. So I'll let me see Professor Eric Sorrell over here. We'll start with you.
Wonderful. I was just saying I was hoping you'd start on the right. Well, thank you for the opportunity. I thought everyone did a fantastic job. And I think as judges, we had a really hard time coming up with a final decision. I know at least I did. I thought both sides did a great job of addressing certain particular issues. One thing that stuck with me was somewhat of an adaptation of the definition of gain of function throughout the debate, and a lack of intention to kind of pull out and kind of carry that forward. So on that end, I thought the opposition did a better job of staying with their definition of gain of function. The other comment I wanted to make was from an opposition perspective, addressing the fact that many of the lab leaks that were addressed were not linked to gain of function research, and I thought that was a really strong argument to separate the two risks and threats that were debated. I thought the government did a great job in closing and throughout in a number of arguments. I would say I had to go with the opposition on this one, but thought everyone did an excellent job.
Thank you, Professor. Let's go sit next to her, Professor G. Gromball.
Well, first of all, I thought everybody did a great job. There were some really strong arguments on both sides, very interesting. I've studied this issue for a long time, so there were some new things that I heard, which was really refreshing and intellectually stimulating. So thank you very much for that. I have to say that one argument I didn't find very compelling was the don't worry, the government won't overreach. We won't lead this into other kinds of research. Just trust us. And I think we have seen with the Select Agent Program and what we're seeing right now, even a totally different situation with regulation of abortion, that you see that people are not willing to step close to the line if that line means jail time. You know what I mean? So I think it's really important to be very careful of how regulation is applied when it could have these other effects. So I didn't care for that argument, but I thought the government had a good set of arguments. I wish that they had gone a little bit further into the actual, some of the potential usefulness of gain of function research. So I think that could have been a thread to pull. So I have to say I would go with the opposition.
Thank you. Let's go behind to Professor Milton in the style.
Well, I missed the first part of the government's case, so I should probably abstain from voting, but
that's fair. We'll count it as a half vote if I need to tie, but it's still very welcome to give us your opinion on the debate.
Well, I thought that the presentations were really well done, and that I second the question about there was some movement about what the definition of what we were talking about was, which made it, I thought, difficult for both sides, but especially the government to grapple with, because their definition seemed to morph a little bit over time, over presentations. But I thought that there was at one point it seemed an attempt by the government to restrict it to new agents, or maybe it was just that these were going to produce new agents, and that there ought to be an exploitation of alternative technologies like pseudoviruses, but it was never really clearly articulated why that would replace doing gain of function. And on the other hand, The con side came back to talking about safety, and there was a weakness in the government's case, which has been pointed out by one of the other judges, that many of the accidental releases that they talked about had nothing to do with gain of function research, and I didn't think that the opposition to the government actually jumped on that very well. And I thought that the argument that the opposition made, that this would essentially push gain of function research underground and away from the ability to regulate, was compelling and not very well rebutted. So again, we come down on the side of the opposition.
Awesome. Okay, I like to keep people on their toes. So let's go over here. Josh Wenzel, what is your opinion?
Thanks, Jake. So I agree. I think the sort of difficulty of grasping the definition, or sort of like pinning one down, I guess reflects sort of the actual general debate we're having outside of this room. So I think that was some difficulty on both sides, but I think there was a strong individual case, I think, on the government side saying that we're going to develop the point further of being like, hey, this doesn't involve making things flow, but maybe that point could help through a little bit more firmly. And the same, I'm sorry about pseudovirus research, but I think the government side could have done more to develop more what are these alternatives. I think someone brought up, okay, there are reasons pseudovirus not sufficient, but I think I would like to see more sort of back and forth, particularly on that point. And also the just trust us kind of thing on the government side. I think I think the opposition could have some more time to talk about that, but I don't think that was necessarily a very strong argument from the government side. And lastly, I think the point about this applying only to federal funding, I think, was brought up in the U.S. was brought up by the opposition pretty effectively. I don't think that was provided as effectively by the government side. So I'll give it to the opposition in this case.
Awesome, thank you. I'm just going down my random completely organized list at this point. Let's go with Professor Salzberg.
Well, I think I have a somewhat different view from the other judges. I felt like I'll start with the very last points made by the government, which I thought were really compelling, were that the benefits, the supposed benefits of gain-of-function research hinge upon an assumption that the pathogens that are developed in a laboratory environment through artificially mutating it are somehow going to match what occurs in nature, and therefore going to make sense to design antivirals or antibiotics against. And the government, I thought, now of course that was the last point, so the opposition didn't have a chance to address that point. So I don't know if that is fair or not, but I thought it was a very compelling point I wanted to hear earlier. On the other hand, I thought the opposition did make a good point about the fuzziness of the definition of gain of function, and I was hoping for the government to make that a little more clear. But ultimately, I come down on the side of the government.
Thank you. Okay, I'll make it easier on you. Let's just go to Professor Stewart, or Professor.
Well, I'm glad to agree with Dr. Salzberg that the definition was not well formed and morphed over time with invocation of unpredictable nature of all mutations, almost in all contexts, was the impression I got from the comments made. So that failure to define, and then the government's argument that the restrictions could be well parsed and crisp just didn't hold, given the arguments that government positions followed with. I don't think, since it was introduced at the last, I think the lack of value of gain of function not being well demonstrated is scientifically false, and the opposition didn't have a chance to rebut it. And finally, I think the argument that risk is overstated was sustained because the examples that were given were not ones from gain of function labs under regulations that apply to gain of function. And none of them resulted in a pandemic. So neither were they from the right context, nor were they resulting in a pandemic. So I had to come down on the side of the opposition.
Thank you. Let's go to Professor Sprinkle.
Yeah, well, 4 minutes isn't very much, is it? I mean, not quite what a physician gets to spend with a patient these days, but it's close. So and it's hard to do a lot of nuance in that amount of time without speaking very rapidly. And so it's a real limitation. The definitional issues were on both sides, and neither side brought the other to task for that problem. And that could have been an easy win, but wasn't taken. The other thing, the opposition said that we should never consider evil in our research. Well, I mean, that was a nice, slow fastball right across the letters, and the government didn't even swing. And I thought that was, so you can't, it doesn't count against the opposition. It doesn't count against the government. Then the government got itself in a peculiar position where it said, in essence, relax, we're all specialists. The people interpreting these rules are specialists. The funders are specialists. Experts all around, no problem. But then in the same speech, said that the real risk here is a lab error. But there are lots of specialists in laboratories. They're entirely specialists. So there was an unmistakable incoherence in some of those arguments. On the whole, I think the opposition did a bit better, was a bit more credible, but if they'd had 5 minutes of these problems might have gone away.
Thank you. Okay, Catherine Strama.
Well, congratulations to all of you for continuing this amazing practice of bringing really important issues up for debate. I think it's a lost art in some circles, and I'm really glad to see you discussing it in this most august house with this most august panel of judges.
The Justice Conference Room.
It's very exciting.
Actually.
You're here. But because the government seemed to overstate the risk of accidental release, and the opposition built a case of support for a discussion to develop the evidence base around the impact of a gain-of-function research, I do oppose.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, Professor Thomas, the blue.
Yeah, nice job. Thanks for putting so much time and thought into this. It was enjoyable. I think the government had the tougher job to try to make that case to restrict something, and in my view, really failed to be clear on what would be restricted and how it would be restricted. That was a harder argument to make, and so I tend to, I favor the opposition for that reason. I think it was just, but in a debate, I think you had a harder job. The government side had a little bit harder job because trying to make those cases, and I think that these points that were made about the where the slippery slope was a really good comment. I think it was made because, and it wasn't combated to my satisfaction, because as someone that does research, I don't know where you would draw the line. Which we put sequences in and out of bugs all the time. Where would we draw the line? So,
thank you, Professor Gupta.
Sure. Yeah. Well, thank you for the opportunity to be a judge. I thought both sides really obviously put a lot of work and thought into preparing their statements, and I think that the government actually, at least I felt that you sort of conveyed with more drama and enthusiasm your arguments, and so I give you a lot of performance. But I do think that the strength of the arguments were stronger with the opposition. I think you really brought to light the chilling effect and the unintended consequences and the slippery slope argument, and that I agree with that. It was not rebutted. And I think that the examples using the accidental leaks, none of which are actually, or at least not purportedly to be gain of function effects, were sort of misaligned with what the argument was trying to show. So I go with the opposition on this front, but give the government a lot of credit for trying. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Talat.
So this was actually my first time judging a debate, so it was really fabulous to see how much work you did in your argument, and I was really impressed by both sides. I thought you both did a really nice job. The risks equals probability times impact I found to be a strong argument. However, I thought that the slippery slope and the chilling effect on other research was even a stronger argument. The example of the adenovirus and making adenovirus more infectious to transfer gene therapy, I thought was a very compelling argument. And that would make it more infectious and therefore be a gain of function research. And so this time I have to go with the opposition, but I thought both sides did a really nice job.
Okay, cold shouldered you guys, and we're going to go back to Sherry Vaughn.
First of all, I thank you for inviting me. This was really invigorating, and I really enjoyed getting back to my roots of risk assessment in biology instead of just budgets and how we get released on campus.
Those are important too.
This is really awesome. Great job to both. This is a really hard topic. That's why it hasn't been solved yet, right? So I agree with a lot of what's been said about the chilling effect across research. As someone who has lived through the chilling effect of select data regulations and defunding, some of that work has happened. I've seen research compilations destroyed and people leave research because it's been too hard to do. So that point struck me with the opposition. And the idea that if we were to defund it in the US for the government, we don't control the rest of the world, so that kind of puts us behind the 8 ball with whatever else is going on. A couple things I have not heard. One of the statements the opposition made was that risk is inherent and that we don't stop all research just because there's been a lot of leak. So I thought that was a really strong point that wasn't rebutted. We wouldn't have any research if we went that way. And they also addressed that the pause in 2014 led to restarting with stronger oversight in 2017. So that kind of ties into the fact that many lab leaks from before that were used. So you have to look at today's world and today's regulations and oversight and safety. The other thing, I had a hard time with the closing argument. I found it kind of circular and unspecific, and I wish it had been really pointing back to the examples as to why it's really, really bad. It's like we're just saying, it's very bad, stop it. Good concrete examples might have pushed us a little more in that direction. For that reason, I side with the opposition.
Thank you. And then last but not least, Professor Pekosh.
Everyone was great in terms of their preparation and really clear in terms of their arguments, so credit to everybody on the group. Just to restate what was my, I'm not just my study section, so my score driving issues were really, as stated before, the lack of clear definition for gain of function. Started by saying it's clear to everybody, but some of the government speakers actually muddled that argument very much to make it unclear to me. Not connecting the risk of gain of function with lab leaks was another one that was there. Thought the opposition did a good job of talking about how the definition being so broad it would adversely affect things that were not intended to be affected. And I guess there's maybe one lost opportunity by the opposition was to really emphasize some of the positive aspects that can be the safety that's in place already to minimize the risks to the investigators of lab leaks and those kind of exposures. So I think overall I found the argument for the opposition to be the more compelling argument.
Awesome, thank you. And then last week, while the judges were deliberating, we also had the audience vote. Interestingly, the audience just barely voted for the government. We count that as one vote. 6 to 8 for the government, for the opposition.
That really helps us.
It's a moral victory, right? You're the people's candidate. But
I
yes.
don't know what we would have done without that.
But again, the opinions expressed herein are strictly those related to the content of the debate in and of itself, and not necessarily the true individual opinions of the people who have spoken. But thank you all so much for coming. Now is the part where we bribe you all with food to like us even more. So please walk over to the next room and eat and drink as much as you want. Do remember that we do have undergrads here, so IDs are necessary to drink. And also give me back the legal pads because those are expensive. $60. I cleaned out the bookstore next door because I forgot. So Julia has a reimbursement to approve. But thank you so much. If you did part, come talk to me and I will get you a voucher.